Party people, head back to your seats, please. As you do, I want to answer that question after. Except this year. We've had a Christmas tree up in our house for over a month now. Already. Somebody's applauding. In fairness to Dawn, this is a conversation we have had often. This year we actually did a photo shoot in our house for something that you'll see later on here at Venture. We put the tree up for that and just left it up. And I'll tell you what, this morning, bright and early, actually not bright, dark and early, when I walked downstairs, the glow of that Christmas tree, it's growing on me. I'm a fan. All right, so this month marks halfway through. You just heard Jake talking about our New Life initiative. And so what we're doing as we dive into week 2 of this series, we're calling it Abundance. We're celebrating the midpoint, but this is fresh content. This is fresh teaching. And we're going to lean in to that right now. But we're looking at the whole New Life era that we launched last fall. And as a midway point, you just heard him use the phrase, God's going to do something in us so he can do something through us. Toward that end, I want to put a resource in your hands. If you weren't here last week, would you go ahead and stick your hand up in the air and wave it like you just don't care? We've got ushers out here that would love to come to you and bring you these resources. And I would point you to all kinds of information that is in there. You can look through it on your own. I would encourage you to note that there's a space to take sermon notes in the back of this, as well as there's some vision stuff in here. Some of you are brand new to our church. You weren't here last fall. We talked quite a bit about New Life, and we had a commitment weekend, the last weekend of that series. Many of you came down here last year and you made a solemn commitment to God. We're going to talk more about that here in a little bit, but this is designed to be a tool, a resource for you. The other thing in there is the commitment card, and I would invite you, I would even urge you to take this commitment card, put it somewhere in your house the next 2 weeks that you're going to see it. And you're going to spend time praying over it, because on the 24th of this month, the last week of this series, we're going to kind of double down on our commitments. And we're going to have a Commitment Sunday weekend where we respond to what God is doing in our hearts. Also, speaking of God doing something in us so he can do something through us, we did this cool thing last year, New Life Daily. It was a daily text message with some prayer prompts, something to work on your heart with, and I sure appreciated those last year. We're doing the same thing this year. If you were here last week, maybe you pulled out your phone last week and you signed up for what we're calling Abundance Daily. If you weren't here last week, pull out your phone, scan that QR code, sign up for that. And oh my goodness, now that the election's over and you don't have all of those candidate weird texts that they send you over and over and over again, now you can fill up your phone with something edifying and lean in to that. Abundance. Last year, we talked about New Life. There was a verse we kind of anchored in last year. I love this verse. Paul, the Apostle Paul, is speaking, challenging, calling something out, courage, of his protege, Timothy. Timothy's pastoring a local church, and Paul sends him a letter. And he uses, you'll notice here, very strong language. I'm in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 18. He says, command them, this church that you're pastoring, command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age. God wants to do something in you so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. And last fall, we talked an awful lot about how in order to grab a hold of that life that is truly life, you have to release. You have to let go of some things that have a death grip on your life. This action, so that you can take a hold of that life. Then Jesus had already spoken on this. He talked a lot about this concept. I would point you to John chapter 10, verse 10, where Jesus said, in contrast to the adversary, the enemy, The devil, here he uses a thief metaphor. The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. Jesus says, but I've come that they may have life and have it to the full. Another translation puts it this way. I've come that they may have life and have it more abundantly. I love that word. Abundance is the title of the series. What does it mean, though, to have this fullest life? I said it last week, and I'll say it again. If you have Jesus, you have more than enough. If you have Jesus, there's abundance to be found there. And each week, as we track through this series, last week we looked at the early church. We talked about a life on mission. The title of today's message is The Blessed Life. Oh boy. That word has perhaps been hijacked. The American church, we've almost made idolatry out of this concept of blessing. We'll talk about that here in a minute. Next week, don't miss next week, week 3, the tax collector. We're going to look at the New Testament tax collector and the humble life. Week 4, we're going to look at King David, the adventurous life. And I hope you came today ready to dig into a story that has been inspiring people for thousands of years. It's a story of one man, one promise, and one epic journey that would change the course of history. Abraham. Father Abraham had many sons had Father Abraham. I am one of them, and so are you. So let anybody else know this song? Anybody else? Say you grew up in the church. Show me you grew up in the church without showing me you grew up in the church. I think I still could do the hand motions to that song. Father Abraham, the Old Testament, the book of Genesis specifically, is filled with many stories about Abraham. These stories are separated by many years, but God does some incredible work in Abraham. You might be thinking, oh, Abraham, the guy with a lot of sheep and camels, right? Well, yeah, there's a whole lot more to his story, though. Abraham's journey, it's been a while since I pulled out my hand map. I need to make sure I'm going here the correct direction. Yeah, so he starts over here. 700 miles to the borders of present-day Iraq, another 700 miles across the Fertile Crescent to Syria, modern-day Syria, another 800 miles then down to modern-day Egypt and ancient Egypt by the inland road, and then back to Canaan, the Promised Land, the Holy Land. We call it Israel today. This isn't just an ancient tale. It's a blueprint of how God can take a single life and bless it, and then use that in turn to bless others, to bless the world. Here's the thing that I want you to walk away with today. God's blessing in your life is not meant to stop with you. You're blessed to be a blessing. Today I want to talk about what it means to live that abundant life, not in terms of material wealth alone, but in the richness of being part of God's bigger story. Because like Abraham, you and I were created not just to be blessed, but to be a blessing. I said this phrase last week. Well, I said it this way: if I'm not dead, then God's not done with me. Would you say that out loud with me? If I'm not dead, then God's not done. You could take this phrase and you could spin it and you say, well, yeah, he's got plans for me in eternity, and sure he does, because for the Christian, death is not the period at the end of the sentence. Rather, it's a comma, a pause point. God has plans for me in eternity, but I'm talking about this season. Maybe we have 70 years if you've got good genes, 80 or 90 years. But there is a season, this life, before the life to come. If I'm not dead, God's not done with me. There's growth here. There's opportunity, no matter how old you are in this room today. Whether you're young, whether you're old, God's just getting started. That God has work to do in you and through you, maybe that you never believed what was possible. When you think about Abraham, in terms of worldwide impact, you have to put Abraham on the list of the most influential people, humans, that have ever lived. I'd put Jesus at the top of that list. I'd probably put Moses on the list. You got to put Abraham on the list. My goodness, he is the beginning of the three largest world religions. They all have the roots that go back to Abraham. You've got Islam, Judaism, Christianity. They all go back to Abraham as the father of their faith. They have different beliefs that proceed from them, but they all rewind to him. And so this man's life, in some ways, shaped the world. It shaped his family, and it shaped everyone who knows about this story. Because Abraham lives in this city called Ur. It's not currently on a map, but if you go searching for Ur, it doesn't exist any longer, and yet it was this city that was south of modern-day Baghdad in Iraq, a significant city. It was called Ur of the Chaldeans. Abraham lived here. He had property here. He had wealth here. He had a purpose here. God was doing things in his life here, and yet God began to call Abraham to a new future. Think about this. If you're Abraham, you're maybe in one of the best moments of your life where everything's going well, and you're kind of like, hey, listen, could I just continue with the way things are? I've got a great job. I don't want to move to another job. I'm living in a place where everything's flourishing and doing well. I don't want to move to another city. And then Abraham receives this call from God, and he might have been tempted to say, you know what, I kind of like it here. Things are going well here. I feel satisfied here. I feel purpose here. I'm sure Abraham's tempted to stay. One of the most important details of the story I'm about to read, Abraham, when he receives a call from God, is 75 years old. And if I think about myself, maybe when I was 25, I'm ready to move to another city. I feel prepared to do that then. Or maybe if I'm 35, I'm ready to change careers, maybe change jobs. Sure, even if I'm 45, I could still make a big shift in my life. But come on, 75 years old? Lord, couldn't you have begun this call earlier? And if I'm not dead, God's not done with me. Couldn't you have told me to do this earlier, God? That's not what God does with a man called Abraham. Why? Well, because God wasn't finished with Abram. Let's read this story together. In the Great Commission of the Old Testament, by the way, if you have not yet highlighted these first 3 verses of Genesis chapter 12 in your Bible, I would encourage you to do this. It's the Great Commission of the Old Testament. See if you can spot the messianic promise that comes out of this language. The Lord had said to Abram, go. Go from your country. I want you to leave the place where you are, your people, and your father's household. Go to the land I will show you. You've never been there before. This is before Google Maps. They didn't even have MapQuest yet. You remember those goofy printouts that you took with you on a road trip? He's never been here before. God's saying, go. I'll make you into a great nation, and I will, there's our word, bless you. I'll make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Did you spot it? Do you see it? There's a messianic promise right there. This is pointing to Jesus. It's almost like Jesus is bookended here between today. It's been about 2,000 years since Christ walked the earth, the incarnation, God becomes flesh. About 2,000 years before that is this call on Abraham's life. Jesus is coming. Jesus is still coming. You're going to be a blessed man, Abraham. And oh, by the way, all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Could we just take a minute and look at the call, God's call on Abraham's life? I see 3 words here. Whatever, whenever, wherever. God comes to him and says, I am going to give you a blessing, but I want you to respond to whatever. I'm going to call you to go, to leave your country, your people, your father's household. I want you to go. Do whatever I ask of you. Whenever. Oh, how about right now? You want to start packing? Everything but the kitchen sink? Wherever. Whatever, whenever, wherever. What does Abraham do when confronted with this call to action? Well, look at verse 4. It says simply, so Abram went, as the Lord had told him, and Lot, his nephew, went with him. Abram was 75 years old. If I'm still, if I'm not dead, God's not done. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife, Sarai, his nephew, Lot, and all the possessions, everything but the kitchen sink that they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. So Abram's response to God's call on Abram's life was what? Yes. Yes to whatever. Yes to whenever. Yes to wherever. This is bold faith. As we journey through this story, are you looking for abundance? Are you looking for that hashtag blessed life? Well, ask yourself this question. How obedient am I? How obedient am I to whatever, whenever, wherever? If I'm super honest with you, I'm not. I'm not super obedient all the time to whatever, whenever, wherever. There's space for me to grow in this area, and I'm betting there is for you as well. I've got 4 observations, if you're taking notes, on Abraham's abundant life. I've got 4 observations that I think we can glean to walk into our own faith journey. Here's the first one. Abraham's call is where his abundance begins. It's his call. Genesis chapter 12, the Great Commission of the Old Testament. Let's pause here. God calls Abraham to leave everything familiar, his home, his extended family, his security, and step, big old giant step, into the unknown. Why? Because God had a promise, a blessing, and a plan that's going to ripple through generations. Here's what we have to grasp right from the start. Abundance begins with obedience. God says whatever, whenever, wherever. Abraham says yes. It's obedience. Abraham's great adventure story doesn't start with comfort, it starts with a call. And his abundant life was sparked when he said yes to God, not when he had all the answers. There's probably some application for us in this. Sometimes God calls us to take steps of faith when it doesn't make any sense in the moment. Have you ever been there? I have. Maybe it's stepping out to serve in a new ministry. Maybe it's starting a conversation with a neighbor who just needs some encouragement. Maybe it's giving generously when it feels risky. True abundance begins when we trust God enough to take that step into whatever, whenever, wherever. If you'll allow me, I want to take a bit of a detour. I told you I've got 4 observations from his life. We're going to come back to those, but I want to take just a bit of a detour into this whole blessing thing, this whole blessed thing. I think the American church has elevated this to a weird space. It's almost become idolatry. We're chasing a blessing, but we're blessed to be a blessing. Let's talk about the call of Abraham and call it what it is. It's a leap of faith. God calls Abraham Abram, as he was known back then, out of his comfortable, settled life in Ur of the Chaldeans, and this was not a small move. God tells him to leave everything, his land, his people, his security, and head off into the unknown. For what? A promise. I'll make you into a great nation. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to make your name great, and you will be a blessing. Now think about that. No Google Maps, no travel itinerary. He just had a command and a promise. How many of us are willing to step out into that kind of faith? Abraham did. He believed that, oh, this is so important. If God called him to it, God would see him through it. Some of you need to hear that today. Some of you need to be reminded of that truth, that if God calls you to it, God himself will see you through it. It's scary to travel the entire arc of the Fertile Crescent, 2,000 plus miles. But if God calls, he sees us through it. Abraham's blessing didn't start when he had everything figured out. It started when he said yes to God. Maybe there's some of you that are here today and you feel like God is calling you to something. Maybe it's starting a new career. Maybe it's a new ministry opportunity. Maybe it's simply trusting him in a difficult season, but you're hesitant because you don't have all of the answers. But like Abraham, the blessing is in the obedience, not in the certainty. Last week I distributed those commitment cards like we just did a bit ago. And I'm guessing for some of us, we looked at them and there was a little bit of a scary moment of faith, a catch in our spirit. Some of you are remembering, oh my goodness, I made a commitment a year ago, and maybe God is whispering in your ear, well, I need to finish strong. I made a solemn promise. I need to step up to that. God, would you give me the faith and the courage and the endurance to see that through? Some of you are brand new around here, and you look at that and you're like, well, I'm not on board yet. I'm not invested in that way here at Venture. Or maybe some of us is like, I'm brand new to this whole church thing. I've never done that before. I've never given to a local church. And I'm just starting to read my Bible and explore a little bit more about what that means and what God's calling me to, and that feels scary. Maybe for some of us, oh my goodness, God's begun to whisper in your ear, and you saw that commitment card last week, and you've been praying about it this week, and you're remembering that the 24th of this month, we're going to do a similar commitment moment in the service. And for you, it's not about finishing strong, and it's not about a new commitment. You've already made one, but for you, it's like, I think God is nudging me toward expansion here, an expanded gift. And that feels scary, and it stretches me. Oh my goodness. If God calls you to it, God sees you through it. That idea of being blessed to be a blessing, what does that even mean? The core of the message, God is telling Abraham, you will be a blessing. God's plan for Abraham wasn't just about making him wealthy or giving him a whole bunch of descendants. It was about using Abraham to channel the blessing outward to others, ultimately to all the nations. Can we make this personal? What does it mean for us to be blessed, to be a blessing? Well, first of all, it calls for a mindset shift. We need to understand that blessings, whether they're material or relational or spiritual, they're not just for our own benefit. God blesses us so that we can in turn pass those blessings along to others. It's a shift from a mindset of accumulation, me, mine, ours, to one of distribution. It's recognizing that our blessings are a part of a bigger story. It's God's story. He's using people to accomplish his work on earth, including this people. It's recognizing stewardship over ownership. I get ownership. I've gotten that since I was a little kid on the playground. Me, mine. I get what that means. But the blessings we have, they're not ours to hoard. They're ours to steward. Abraham knew that his role was to trust God and to be faithful with what he was given. And the same goes for us. Whether it's our time, our talents, or our treasure, God asks us to use what he's given us for his purposes. Here you go. This idea of being blessed to be a blessing, well, it's calling us to blessing beyond our comfort zone. Notice that Abraham is called out of his comfort zone. Blessing others often requires us to take a step out of what's familiar and what's comfortable. Maybe it's inviting somebody to church that doesn't share your beliefs. Maybe it's reaching out to that neighbor that you barely know, or maybe it's giving generously when it stretches your budget. Being a blessing means being willing to step into places and spaces that feel a little bit uncertain. But here are some examples of being a blessing. How about this one? Time. I don't know about you, but my calendar is pretty valuable to me. My time is pretty valuable to me. Some of you may be thinking, well, I'm not financially well off. How in the world can I be a blessing? Well, listen, blessings aren't just financial. Your time, your kindness, your words of encouragement, those are blessings as well. I think of people who spend hours volunteering or mentoring youth or simply listening to somebody who's going through a tough time. Listen, that's being a blessing. Prayers. Oh, prayers that reach beyond. Don't underestimate the power of prayer. Never underestimate the power of prayer. Abraham's blessing was tied to his relationship with God, and so is yours. When you pray for others, when you lift up family, friends, even strangers, when God nudges you toward that, you're stepping into a role of being a blessing. Generosity in action. I've heard so many stories over this last year of people who sacrificed, took an action step of faith, said no to this so they could say yes to God. Listen, as your pastor, those stories inspire me. So how in the world do we be a blessing today? Well, here's just a few ideas on how we can live this out, practically speaking. Here's one: be intentional. Being a blessing doesn't happen by accident. It requires intentionality. Maybe that's setting aside a portion of your budget for giving. Maybe it's planning your week so you have time to serve others. How could you be purposeful in this? Listen for God's nudges. He does. He whispers in your ear. He nudges you. As Abraham listened to God's call, just like that, we need to be attentive to the ways that God is nudging us to act. Maybe today even you feel a tug to call a friend that you haven't spoken to for a while. That might be God nudging you. Maybe it's lending a helping hand to a coworker. That might be God nudging you. Don't ignore these nudges. That's God inviting you to be a part of His plan. Here you go. Start small, but think big. Sometimes we think, I don't have enough to make a difference, but don't underestimate the power of small actions. A smile, a word of encouragement, maybe just buying somebody's coffee. These small gestures can lead to big blessings. So start small, but keep the picture in mind. God can use your small acts of faithfulness in ways that you can't even begin to imagine when you say yes to whatever, whenever, wherever. I was sharing with you 4 observations. Here's the second one. A life of faith and abundance is not without its challenges. Life's not easy. Abraham's journey wasn't a walk in the park. He, I'm sure, had moments of doubt and frustration. In Genesis chapter 15, verses 1 through 6, we read about his honest conversations with God. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abraham in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abraham. Why does he say that? Well, if you were to read chapter 14, I don't have time to get into it today, there's this bizarre interaction with this amazing character in the Old Testament, Melchizedek, the king of Salem. In my opinion, you're looking at a theophany there. This is Jesus in the Old Testament. And almost a communion celebration moment right there in the Kidron Valley, right outside of modern-day Jerusalem. But Abraham's afraid because he just had to go on a military campaign all the way up to the north end of the country to rescue his nephew Lot. You could read about that later. He had a lot of things to be afraid of. He's worried about his legacy. God's promised he's going to make him into a great nation, but there's just one problem. I'm your shield, your very great reward. Then the word of the Lord came to him, this man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. I think we missed a slide. Let's go back one. Abraham said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? This is what he's worried about. And the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abraham said, you've given me no children, so a servant in my household will have to be my heir. The word of the Lord came to him, this man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and your blood will be your heir. He took him outside and said, look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. And he said, so shall your offspring be. Abraham believed the Lord. This is repeated again in the New Testament, in the faith chapter, and he credited it to him as righteousness. Abraham count the stars. I was out in the woods this past week in those pre-dawn hours. It was a gorgeous morning, Friday morning, and I don't know if you saw this, no clouds. I snapped this picture. And I thought, oh my goodness, that is absolutely gorgeous. Look at all those stars in suburbia, where we deal with light pollution. And I just wondered, what did the ancients see when they looked up at the heavens? My wife and I, Dawn, were in Banff, Canada. I got to do a wedding there years ago, and away from light pollution, I looked up one night and was just wowed by the depth of the field of stars. I snagged this picture from an observatory in Canada. Check this out, the depth of the stars. I bet the ancients, when they looked up at the heavens, they saw a more brilliant picture than that. Abraham, Joseph, Moses, the Israelites as they were wandering around. So here's Abraham staring at the promise, literally on the horizon, confronted with the now and the not yet. Can we take a moment to look his doubt in the face? Abram said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I am childless? Even with God's promise ringing in his ears, Abraham wrestled with questions. Let's face it, so would you. Here's the beauty of Abraham's story. Abundance doesn't mean an absence of struggle. It means that even in the struggle, there's a promise we can hold on to. God reassures Abraham by taking him outside. He shows him the stars. So shall your offspring be. And Abraham believed. I've got a son who happens to be in Thailand right now. 23, fancy free. I'm texting him. He's 12 hours away, literally on the other side of the world. Sunrise here, sunset there. While we're texting, it dawns on me, we're looking at the same sun. Sunrise, sunset. Same sun, but from opposite perspectives. Hindsight is always 20/20. It's hard to see God's plan as we look forward, but oftentimes when we look at the rearviewed mirror, same sun, same God. That's what you were up to in my life. Maybe you're in a season of waiting. You're holding on to a promise, but the fulfillment seems far off. Abraham's story reminds us that the abundant life isn't always instantaneous. It's lived in the tension in believing even when we can't see the outcome. It's in those moments that God invites us to trust him deeper in the whatever, the whenever, the wherever. Here's an observation. Abundance gets multiplied when you move from receiving to giving. What did he say? All peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Abraham's life was designed to overflow into the lives of others. This is where we get stuck. We like the idea of being blessed, but being a blessing, that can feel costly. There's this moment In Genesis chapter 22, Abraham is tested in a profound way when God asks him to offer up his son Isaac as a sacrifice. If you know the story, you know that God intervenes, spares Isaac, and reaffirms his promise. Genesis chapter 22, verse 15 says this: "The angel of the Lord called to Abram from heaven a second time and said, 'I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you've done this, you've followed through on faithfulness, even in something like, now you've got the child of the promise. God's asking me to take it away? Because you've done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed me.'" Hear me. This test was not about cruelty. It was about trust. God was showing Abraham and us that true abundance is found when we're willing to give back what we've been given. Abraham's willingness to give up Isaac demonstrated that he trusted God's promise more than he clung to his blessing. So what are you holding on to tightly? And you're missing the opportunity to be a blessing. It's your time, your resources, your talents. Hear me. God doesn't ask us to give because he needs it. He asks us to give because that's how we experience the fullness of an abundant life. In the whatever, the whenever, and the wherever. We have a dear couple that is fairly new to our church. They started coming to Venture right after the New Life Commitment Weekend that so many of us experienced last November. They're new around here, but oh my goodness, have they jumped in with both feet. I want you to hear Katie and Ian's story. Check this out.
I'm Ian. This is Katie, my wife, and we've been going to Venture for about a year.
We have 8 children and 3 grandchildren.
Life happens. It can be your furnace, it can be a car thing, it can be a child thing. For us, it's been, I literally sit in a space and work that often has ups and downs. The company I'm with right now has gone through 3 rounds of layoffs, and each time you go, wait, am I part of that next one? And you go, can I maybe just pull back a little bit of what I've given to the church or what I give on a weekly basis, so I can kind of put that to the side? And you go, no, this is a faith journey to trust. At times it's a deep breath. It's going, okay, yeah, God, this is what you've called us to give, and we're gonna stay on the path. Giving is a gift. God's entrusting us to take something that truly isn't ours and say, God, here's a portion of it back. Venture is giving us an opportunity to connect to a meaningful project that has clear outcomes and a clear direction behind it.
As part of the New Life campaign, we are super excited about the community outreach that is going to be able to happen. We're also super excited about the food pantry and the ability to grow that and continue to meet the needs here in Hamilton County. Our younger 4 boys love sports, and just the opportunity to have sports collide with their ability to bring friends to play.
Providing environments that allow that to happen is fantastic for the church.
I can sit and think back to times when we were newly married, we had babies, and things were just really, really tight. And giving when you're in that position can be extremely difficult, because you know that sometimes it's a meeting a need or it's giving to the church. If you're new on the giving journey, I would just encourage you to get involved in whatever capacity God is calling you to.
Generosity and faithful giving over the years has really helped me posture my heart in a space of generosity. Giving in the church is a step, but it's not the end of generosity. And I will say, Katie's challenged me many times in life about my lack of generous spirit. Our world tells us to hold on to it. Our world tells us it's for you. Our world tells us you either need more things, or you should put it in savings, or you should protect this, or you should do this for your kids, and that's not what God says. God says, no, I need you to give a part of this back to me, certainly as an act of what I've called you to do, but also as an act of faith. There's amazing stories out there where God has blessed because of giving, but ultimately I know I'm the one that was blessed in that because of my growth in faith.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Ian, for sharing your story. 4 observations. Here's the 4th. The ripple effect creates abundance that lasts. Jesus, ultimately, is the fulfillment of the promise to Abraham. He comes to bring salvation to the world, but here's what's amazing. Abraham didn't live to see that fulfillment. He didn't get to see it with his eyes this side of eternity. He trusted God's promise even though he didn't get to see the end result. There's something you and I can learn from that. We may never fully see the impact of the ways we bless others, but that doesn't mean that our efforts are in vain. It's kind of like when you throw a stone and you toss it into a lake. You see the initial splash and then some ripples moving further out. When you choose to bless somebody, you create ripples that reach places you can't even imagine today. Being a blessing has a ripple effect. That's abundance. That's the John 10:10 kind of life. Would you stand up with me right now? As you do so, I want to challenge you, if you have not already done this, would you take that commitment card and put it someplace this week that's going to remind you, when you see it, to pray. Pray for what God is calling you toward. What of this? God wants to do something in you so he can do something through you. Opportunities are in store for you. We're blessed to be a blessing. I want to respond to this message with a song of commitment. As we do that, would you bow your heads with me? Would you pray? God, I thank you for Father Abraham. I thank you for the inspirational story that we read there in our Bibles. Blessed to be a blessing. God, give us the courage of Abraham. When you say whatever, we say yes. When you say whenever, we say yes. When you say wherever, we say yes. In Jesus' name, we pray that prayer. Amen.